I consider myself fortunate that my taste in games is pretty flexible, generally speaking. While this might be somewhat to the detriment to my YouTube channel, where the platform generally rewards those who find a single specific niche and hyper-focus on that to garner a solid following, it's great for me because despite my playtime habits for games, I will play pretty much anything just to try it, at least. It's unquestionable that my main interest in games, however, is rooted mostly in platformers and FPS games. I do also enjoy action-adventure games, especially lately, but it's not hard to take one look at the kind of content I make and the kinds of games I play and the amount of time I put into those games that, indeed, being of the assumption that I generally prefer fast-paced action is a safe one to make. However, that isn't to say that I reject all forms of games. Puzzle games are my jam too, and I've been hankering to sink my teeth into an RPG recently as well. Be it a fighting game, racing game, or visual novel, you're sure that I've found at least one game in every genre that I can say that I really like. There is one style of game, however, that is more difficult to define, both in its style, but also with some unifying label. These games don't often have much of a fail state. They aren't exactly difficult. They don't pose much of a challenge. Their focus is more on providing some kind of experience, usually focusing on small things, maybe embracing a large abstract idea. The games are typically not verbally narrated and focus on the visuals, the graphics, and especially the art design and concept. The soundtracks are mostly free-flowing and usually consist of mainly pads and harmonic movement rather than proper melodies. They aren't so atmospheric as they are meditative, and that's why I label these types of games as such. I don't like to get too much into things like mental health or anything just because I know that it can be a touchy topic for YouTube and for some viewers. Personally, I can't help but to feel somewhat skeptical of the field of psychiatry, just because I can't shake the feeling that some people are medicated not out of necessity, but for other, less altruistic reasons. But take my skepticism with a grain of salt, because despite that, in recent years, I've always described my own afflictions as having an anxious disposition. Over the course of my adult life, and especially after having struck out on my own in Japan, I've identified a number of different kinds of irrational fears and different triggers that are the most likely to send my already overactive mind into a downward spiral, a positive feedback loop of thoughts which are all increasingly tinged with indescribably strong feelings of fear, dread, and panic. A couple years ago, it got so bad that I began to experience psychosomatic symptoms of something resembling a bad cold, which I had convinced myself was actually the onset of a rare terminal illness that, to be honest, I'm still kind of afraid of. It took a Japanese neurologist to tell me that there was really nothing wrong with me, and that it was clear to him that I was experiencing heightened levels of stress and that I was actually physically fine. The tone he took with me was one of agitation. He was irritated that I was basically wasting his time with what was effectively my imagination. It was this combination of factors that drew me to realize that there was a serious problem with my so-called anxious disposition that I needed to get under control. Since that time, I've gotten a lot better at coping with these issues. While I don't really have access to therapists or anything of that kind, being out here in the Japanese countryside and not being able to afford such a thing. I got into reading especially books about psychology, which helped me to point out the origin of these catastrophic ways of thinking and how to diminish or eliminate the power they had over me. I've made great progress in this area, and I worry a lot less about things I used to. There are still a couple of triggers that can strain the mechanisms I've devised to keep these kinds of thought spirals at bay, but they carry nowhere near the effect on me that they used to. Despite that, however, sometimes it can be difficult to take my mind off of those kinds of triggers once I'm exposed to it. Even though the spiral can't really sustain itself, the topic can still nag at me and still lead to some elevated feelings of anxiety. That is where meditative activities can come into play, especially meditative games, as I've called them. Games like Journey and Flower are games I would personally consider purer examples of games in the meditative style, and even games like Breath of the Wild, with its sweeping vistas, its naturalistic background, sound, and general closeness to nature, and even Shenmue with its slow pace and close attention to fine details can be meditative elements of those games as well. For me, however, my go-to meditative game is a game called Sphera. Sphera was developed by Chilla's Arts. It's ironic that one of the first games published by Chilla's Arts, a development team best known for their Japanese psychological horror games, was this. Sphera is very simple. You control a sphere in a large enclosed area that is full of grass, flowers, and trees. Your goal is to grow the tree at the center of the area until it is fully grown, which upon doing so, the game will end. First, you grow the tree by offering it flowers and trees. Eventually, animals start to appear in the area, and you can offer them to the tree too. The animals change every time the tree enters a new phase of its development, and it seems like the animals have a higher value towards the tree's growth than the plants, though you will still need to offer plants to it since animals can be completely depopulated and often take time to respawn. Since it takes time for plants and animals to respawn, it's important that you explore the whole area. Wandering aimlessly, running into whatever, and bringing it to the tree is really all you need to do. The gameplay is that simple, and it can be as short as 35 minutes from start to finish. The art style is very interesting. It's simple, but also a bit surreal. There is a very dreamlike quality to the visuals of this game, and even the animations. That, coupled with the soundtrack, which consists of very simple synth and piano tracks that themselves match the dreamlike quality of the art in its own way, end up creating a game that is more of an experience than anything else. There isn't any real narrative to the game. The only text you will find are messages talking about things like nature and peace on Earth. Even the wording sounds like it would work as a meditation prompt of some kind. There is a message that you can find behind a large rock in the game that is near the outer wall some ways away from the tree. It's something that you can only really find if you explore the map more carefully, at least somewhat. The message that appears reads, "Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree." When I first saw this message years ago, I really didn't think much of it, but upon revisiting this game and seeing that message, it carried a much more profound meaning. Being a survivor of the two biggest apocalypse prophecies ever, Y2K and December 21st, 2012, I don't really think much about things like the end of the world anymore. Even with the more recent prophecy, which never came to fruition, about a megaquake that would supposedly hit Japan on July 5th, I really didn't pay much attention to that either. Simply, the implications of apocalypse on a global scale are so extreme it's almost unimaginable. But probably still the best example of that idea in video game form would probably be The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Everyone has their own reaction to what they would do if they knew that the world they lived in, including them, would be destroyed. Some people panic, some people go absolutely nuts, some hide in fear, etc. The narrator here, possibly the voice of the developer themselves, is asserting that they would still plant their apple tree, still implying that they had already planned to at some point before they knew about the impending doom the world faced. Planting an apple tree is an interesting action in this sense because it essentially means that they are bringing new life to the earth. This is in spite of the fact that the world is set to go to pieces tomorrow, which is nowhere near a long enough time for a newly planted apple tree to reach a sapling stage, let alone reach maturity. The act itself is a simple one, a very small act, one that could theoretically be finished in only a matter of a couple minutes or less. It is also an act that is finely detailed, almost impossibly small when taking the entire world into context. Some might say it's an act of futility, that with the end of the world comes to the end of all life on Earth, ergo, attempting to bring new life into the world by planting an apple tree is kind of useless. Yet the narrator asserts that they will do so anyway. The message then includes a simple act of defiance and is strongly laced with a sense of hope for a future wherein, even though the planter may not continue to be able to exist, the apple tree could have a chance at life and thrive. It reminds me of a story one of my college professors opened every semester with for his new students, and even though it took several years, seeing this message again for the first time in such a while, it resonated with me much deeper than it originally did. In some schools of Buddhist thought, there is an emphasis on performing single tasks mindfully. If my memory serves me right, this is especially the case in Zen and Chan Buddhism. This is the kind of practice where you can frequently find monks at their temples performing various everyday simple tasks for long, drawn-out periods of time. The purpose of the exercise is to focus solely on the actions that they are currently performing and nothing else. This is meant to train the minds of monks to be in the moment, to focus on what is now and to forget about what will happen and what has already happened. Even though it isn't necessarily a formal act of meditation, it is, in some sense at least, a meditative act. Sphera seems to follow in that spirit, where you are encouraged to pay attention only to the task of collecting flowers, trees, and animals, and deliver them to the tree, and repeat until the game is finished, all to the sound of gentle, simple music or the sound of wind rustling the leaves on trees. You perform this task all at your own pace. You can try to do it as quickly as possible, or you can just breathe and take in the atmosphere. Since I am so used to being under pressure of certain time constraints or to meet certain standards, it's nice to have a game like Sphera where there are no options to do anything other than collect, explore, and breathe. I often, even in my real life, am a person who forgets to breathe at times, both literally and figuratively, even despite reassurances. It's nice to have a game that encourages it as part of its primary design, like Sphera. Sphera isn't a masterpiece or anything. I doubt there are many people out here still playing it. I seldom find myself booting the game, but it's always there for those days when I just need to quiet my mind. We live in a time where we have to always be going, be moving, and be productive in order to survive. And because of that, it almost never crosses the mind that it might be a good idea to slow down or even stop to admire what's around us. To let all our senses take in the good, calming things we share the world with. In a way, you can see it as an advanced form of touching grass by actually touching it. We sometimes take for granted the things we live and share our environments with. Sometimes we get so used to their presence we kind of behave as though they aren't there. Even though we might not always notice them, they are still there, and all we need to do is decide to take notice. For me, Sphera is that in video game form. There's no option for combat. The game is slow, its only mood is calm and serene, and all it asks you to do is roam and grow a tree. The simplicity of the task along with its mood are the perfect remedy for a noisy mind, especially one seemingly bent on forcing a downward spiral for some reason, and in those cases, Sphera serves me well. I hope that whatever you, the viewer, are going through, that you too have something like Sphera to remind you to detach, if not momentarily, from the stressors of your life, and just focus on the slow and quiet of the moment. It's upon coming back to that we can feel newly refreshed enough to then take care of what we need to. Whatever it is, take the time to lose yourself in it. I can guarantee from my own experience you'll be better for it, and maybe that new sense of clarity might bring you the peace that you need.